The first sound that cut through the cold morning air was not the wind, nor the creak of the old barn door. It was a voice, thin, broken, and trembling. "There, it hurts," she whispered. The rancher froze. He stood halfway between the corral and the house, a bucket of feed hanging from his hand, his boots sunk deep into the frost-hardened earth. In all his years on the ranch, he had learned to recognize danger by sound alone: the snap of a rope, the scream of an animal, the silence after a storm. But this voice was different. It carried pain, yes, but also fear. The kind that came when hope was slipping away. He dropped the bucket and ran. Behind the old windmill, half hidden by tall grass and rusted scrap, lay a woman he had never seen before. Her clothes were torn by thorns, her face pale with exhaustion, her hand pressed tightly against her leg. Blood stained the fabric, dark and frightening against the morning light. She tried to sit up when she saw him, but her strength failed, and she cried out again. "It's all right," the rancher said quickly, kneeling beside her. His voice was steady, even though his heart wasn't. "Don't move. You're safe now. Safe." The word sounded fragile, even to him. The ranch was miles from the nearest town. No neighbors. No signal on most days. He had chosen this isolation years ago, after life had taken too much from him and left him with nothing but land and silence. He hadn't expected the silence to break like this. He tore a strip from his shirt and wrapped it around her wound with practiced care. He'd learned first aid the hard way: storms, accidents, animals that didn't always forgive mistakes. As he worked, he noticed how tightly she clenched her jaw, refusing to scream, refusing to give pain more power than it already had. "Can you tell me your name?" he asked. She hesitated. "Clara." "All right, Clara. I'm going to get you inside. We'll figure the rest out." Inside the house, the fire crackled weakly as he laid her on the old couch. The rancher cleaned the wound more thoroughly now, his hands gentle, his movements precise. It was bad, worse than he'd hoped. The kind of injury that didn't just heal with time and willpower. "You need a doctor," he said quietly. Her eyes filled with tears, not from pain this time, but from something deeper. "I know. But I can't go back." That was the moment he understood this wasn't just an accident. This was a story she had been running from. Hours passed. Outside, the sky darkened, clouds rolling in like a warning. Inside, the rancher made soup, adjusted bandages, and listened. Clara spoke slowly at first, then with words that seemed to pour out once they began. She talked about a life built on promises that broke, about trusting the wrong people, about leaving with nothing but fear and a stubborn hope that somewhere, somehow, she could start again. "I didn't mean to end up here," she said, staring at the ceiling. "But I didn't know where else to go." He understood that too well. The rancher had once stood at a similar edge. Years ago, he had lost his family, not all at once, but piece by piece, through choices and circumstances he still replayed in his mind on sleepless nights. The ranch had been his escape and his punishment. He worked the land to stay alive, but he kept his heart buried deep, where it couldn't be hurt again. Yet here she was, painfully real, undeniably human, forcing him to feel something he'd sworn he wouldn't. When night fell, the storm arrived. Rain hammered the roof. Wind howled through the cracks in the walls. The power flickered once, then died completely. The rancher lit lanterns, their soft glow casting long shadows across the room. Clara's breathing grew shallow. Fever burned through her, her skin hot beneath his hand. "This is getting worse," he muttered. There was only one truck on the ranch. Old, unreliable, and the road to town crossed a river that flooded easily during storms like this. He stood at the window, staring into the darkness, weighing risks that no one else could decide for him. Clara stirred. Her voice was barely a whisper now. Don't leave me." He turned back to her, something tightening in his chest. "I'm not going anywhere." But the truth was cruel. Staying meant waiting. Waiting could mean losing her. The unthinkable choice formed slowly, painfully. At dawn, when the rain softened but the damage was done, the rancher made his decision. He wrapped Clara carefully, lifting her into the truck with more care than he'd ever given anything in his life. The river was already swollen, brown and violent, swallowing parts of the road. He stared at it for a long time. People said he was stubborn. Said he never asked for help. Said he'd rather lose everything than depend on anyone else. Today, that changed. He turned the truck around and drove toward the nearest ranch instead, the one he hadn't spoken to in years. Old grudges. Old pride. Old silence. When he arrived, soaked and desperate, the door opened slowly. The man who stood there looked older, just as worn, just as surprised. "I need help," the rancher said. The words felt heavier than any burden he'd ever carried. "Please." Help came fast after that. Calls were made. A safer route was found. Clara reached the hospital just in time. Days later, the rancher sat alone on the hospital bench, staring at the floor. He had done what he never thought he would, not just risk his life, but his pride. He had opened doors he'd locked for years. When Clara finally woke, she found him there. "You stayed," she said softly. He nodded. "I told you I would." Her recovery was slow. So was his healing, though he didn't yet realize it. As days turned into weeks, they talked. About fear. About mistakes. About the strange way life brings broken people together when they least expect it. Clara didn't stay at the ranch forever. She didn't need to. She left stronger than she arrived, carrying plans instead of panic. On the day she left, she stood at the fence, the land stretching endlessly behind her. "You didn't just save my life," she said. "You reminded me that kindness still exists." After she was gone, the ranch was quiet again, but it wasn't empty. The rancher still worked the land. Still faced storms. Still woke before dawn. But something had shifted. The silence no longer felt like punishment. It felt like peace. Sometimes, pain arrives uninvited. Sometimes it sounds like a whisper in the grass, "There, it hurts," and sometimes, the unthinkable choice isn't an act of destruction, but of courage. Because the strongest thing a person can do is not endure alone, but choose compassion, even when it costs them everything. And in doing so, discover that healing often begins the moment we stop running from one another.